Hey, aloha, Love Tribe. Welcome to the show. I have somebody here with me who is, notably and verifiably the strongest and best looking Bitcoin entrepreneur in Canada, Dave Bradley, the co founder of Bull Bitcoin. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
So you're outside, it seems like, and you're enjoying a little cigar this beautiful afternoon. What's happening, my brother?
Well, it's March in Canada and it's
Hmm.
like 6 degrees Celsius, so that's pretty good. So I'm outside.
You're like, "Yay, it's a warm day." And I know I think you saw, like, I was grilling outside a little bit ago. I like grilling in the snow. There's just something about that, and it's like, "Yay, it's snowing and there's meat on the grill." That's such a good thing. Let's talk about your meat fetish. Like, you have a meat thing going on. Before we get into all the other backstory of who's Dave Bradley and, all the things that you're doing with the Bitcoin rodeo and Bitcoin Well, um, what's up with the meat?
Well, I mean, meat is very important, obviously. It's
Yeah.
what humans need to eat to live. It's an important part of a plant based diet. Um, the things that I eat plants, so the diet is plant based. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think we're lucky here in Alberta to have the best beef in the world. So I talk that up a lot. And, we have this stuff called Brant Lake Wagyu that's a cross between a Japanese Wagyu and an Alberta Black Angus. So it's like, you get Wagyu sometimes, and it's like eating a stick of butter because it's just like it's so good, but it's just like very very fatty, and you can like cut it with a fork, but it doesn't have like a ton of flavor beyond the fat. So the Brant Lake Wagyu crossed with the Black Angus has a much beefier taste and is still just like absolutely beautiful and marbled, and I've never found beef that matches it anywhere in the world. And I talk a lot of shit about this, and everyone who's tried it has agreed with me.
Okay, and so has this been your lifestyle for, your whole life, or did you all of a sudden realize, like, I really need to eat, a lot of cow and,
Um,
you know
yeah, I mean, I think men especially we grow up with this kind of wired into our the primitive parts of our brains that we're supposed to be
Mhm.
eating meat. Like that's the most desirable form of calories that we can take in. And so I always had that growing up, but like I actually grew up um, eating terrible steaks. My parents cooked well done steaks, and I ate them with
Ew.
ketchup,
Oh, yeah, dude,
and
me too. It's
it
like these
was not
thin
good.
steaks, and you're just like, "Can I just have a grilled cheese, please?"
Yeah, and it wasn't until adulthood that I discovered this Brant Lake Wagyu, and since then have been like that's probably the main thing that I eat is the Brant Lake Wagyu. Um,
Say the first part, Brantweg?
Brant Lake. It's
Brant
a
Lake. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
it's a ranch in southern Alberta, and they've got a butcher shop here in Calgary
Okay.
that I highly recommend. And then I was lucky enough to get a half of a pig from a Bitcoiner that I know who he sells these milk fed pigs.
Okay,
And
hold on. Milk-fed pigs? I've never heard of this.
yeah, neither had I. And they have a couple dairy cows that they basically feed the pigs this mixture of like all the grains and stuff that they normally would give them, but
Mhm.
they ferment them in fresh whole milk for a
They
day.
ferment the grains in fresh whole milk.
Yeah, and so they feed the pigs this mixture of like 1 day fermented milk and all the oats and whatever else they're feeding them, and supposedly helps with the digestion of the pigs. But the result is like the best pork I've ever had. It's like red, like beef. It's crazy.
Wow. I know, and I'm a fan. I mean, I had those sausages today because I had sausage and steak, and I love sausage. Um, but it's like you never know what the heck's inside of the ones that you get, and you got to be careful what you're getting, because sometimes it could just be the junk food leftovers of whatever. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and so I think that's an important thing. So, yeah, I think did you and Francis come up with Bull Bitcoin because you guys love, meat, or because of bull
Um,
markets? Or let's kind of come back to, like, who you are. Let's get, come back to, hey, hi, I'm Dave Bradley. I'm this is my history. So let's let the audience know who you are, how you got to this place, how you started Bull Bitcoin, and we'll go from there.
sure, sure. My the short version, I guess, I got into Bitcoin in 2010. I started working full time in Bitcoin in 2013 when I opened what I think was the first physical Bitcoin store in the world.
Oh, cool.
Um, we later merged the company behind that into another company to form Bull Bitcoin
Hmm.
in about 2018. Francis and I formed that. The name for Bull Bitcoin, we were just kind of going back and forth with a bunch of different names, and that was the one that kind of stuck. And I think it has proven to be a pretty iconic name.
It's a
So
great name. I mean, obviously, our goal
there,
is to have bull markets and bull runs, and
yeah,
and obviously don't mess with the bull. And we love meat, so it seems like it checks a lot of boxes.
yeah. And so I was with Bull Bitcoin there until the early 2020, at which point I left to start a software company making Bitcoin software for Bitcoin ATMs.
Oh
And then
wow,
that got me pulled into. I ended up partnering up with Adam O'Brien, who is CEO of Bitcoin Well now.
going well.
Ended
Yep.
up on that software company, and that kind of got me sucked into Bitcoin Well, where I joined to take the company public, and we went through that process. And then I left my executive position there last year, no, 2023, and but I'm still on the board there, and since I've been sort of working on a bunch of small projects and doing some consulting, and also have an events and media company that we run a number of different things, including a conference called the Bitcoin Rodeo, which is this June in Calgary, Alberta.
June, I know I've looked up at the site. Who's going to be there? Like, because I'm like, I need to get my butt up there and play some music with you guys and do some talking. Uh, hint, hint.
Yeah, yeah, we would love to have you.
I would love to come, man. That would be so
We,
much
we've got
fun.
a pretty good lineup. You can check it out on bitcoinrodeo.com.
Yeah, yeah. I'm pulling this up right now here. So, okay, because let me pull it up because I've got Bitcoin Road. Let me share the screen here. Hold on here. Bitcoin Rodeo. There we go. Alberta's Bitcoin Conference. Okay, so this is what I've got here. Where's the lineup?
Yeah, so you can scroll there if you just grab on to where the speakers are with Francis and Nico, etc. There,
Okay,
just scroll to the right.
scroll to the right
Uh,
and to the left.
yeah, you can see a bunch more of the speakers we've got there. We've got a pretty good lineup of. We've got a lot of Canadians as always,
Yep.
and we have a really strong sort of core of Bitcoiners here in Calgary as well.
Hmm.
We got a bunch coming out from Vancouver and whatnot, and then we're really dipping into sort of like the freedom community as well. So
Cool.
you can see some people on there like Brett Oland there, who's the CEO of a company called Bow Valley Credit Union, which is a credit union here in Alberta that has been very pro Bitcoin and has been pro gold. And so they're actually putting gold on the balance sheet of the bank so that if the entire financial system collapses, their depositors will have more than nothing, basically.
Wow.
And they haven't been able to do it from a regulatory perspective yet with Bitcoin, but they're quite pro Bitcoin, and we're working with them on a few different initiatives. So that I think is the way to go. The small banks, get your money out of the big banks and find a place that will not abuse your trust the way that the large banks do.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously we're seeing a lot of different regulations come forward, and hopefully, I mean, who the heck knows? I mean, obviously here in the United States, it's different than what's going on in Canada, and we still love you, Canada. Like whatever the hell these retarded politicians are doing, like fuck them. Um,
Yeah.
Seriously, I'm so over this, and I was just doing a little post. Remember the Who? This, meet the old boss, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. I mean, we are getting fooled again, but we're not. And I feel like it's just such a nightmare. And Bitcoin solves for this. What were you doing before you were, in 2010 being a Bitcoiner?
Yeah,
Tell me about it.
I was kind of like a serial entrepreneur. I
Mhm.
had just sold. I had a company. We were doing recycling actually in the city of Calgary. We had a
Okay.
bunch of trucks going around picking up people's recycling before there was a city system, and also before I learned that recycling was a giant scam. But part of running that company did expose me to that, and sort of
Yeah.
got that was sort of some of the first times I would have been in my 20s, when I was exposed to the fact that a lot of the structures that we see that make up the world that are sort of endorsed by the traditional powers that be are actually just bullshit.
They're
And
bullshit. What was your crack into that? Like, how did you just see, like,
um,
recycling's not happening, the funding's going somewhere else? Like, what was
no,
the,
yeah,
veil
so
that got removed?
yeah, once I dug into it, I learned that like the only thing that actually makes sense outright to recycle is metal, because
Mm,
it's a lot more expensive to dig new metal out of the ground and refine it than it is to recycle old metal. And
okay.
it's also much more environmentally friendly to not have to dig another giant hole in the ground. So metal recycling makes sense unequivocally. Um, paper recycling is kind of like a wash. Like it's a renewable resource, and it's like costs pretty similar for the recycled paper at this point.
Mhm.
um, and there's lots of good things they can make with recycled paper. Glass is just basically fake. Like glass is made out of silicone, of sand, right? So like it's the most plentiful element on Earth. We don't need to recycle that at all, and there's not really possible to recycle glass. It gets made into like reflective paint and fiberglass technically, but you could just make that out of primary materials. And
Okay.
then the biggest scam though is the plastics recycling, which is not even a real thing. We were paying a company essentially to ship our plastics to China for recycling,
Mhm.
and that was before we kind of learned about how plastics recycling works. And it, you can't really just recycle a mixed blend of plastics. You need to separate them by polymer and color and all this stuff, and it's just not realistic. And so I speculate. You've heard of this like giant Pacific garbage patch.
Mhm.
I think that is actually all of the recycled plastic from North America for the last 20, 30
Recycled.
years. And
Basically,
they,
like, we just dumped that shit here and didn't actually recycle it.
yeah, yeah, they pay a Chinese company to take it. They have no use for it on the other end
Yeah.
because it's not actually recyclable. So cheapest thing for them is to just get out into the ocean and dump it into the ocean.
And so was there any traceability, like, obviously this was back in, before 2010, you could stick a little,
Yeah,
what is it, those air tags on
yeah,
the batch and just be like, where the heck is this stuff going? And you're like, whoa, I'm in,
yeah,
near Fiji or something, or what, not Fiji, that's too south, but near
yeah.
Hawaii.
We never had any way to trace it. I have seen some YouTubes and whatnot of people who have traced the recycling lately. And one thing that you find that actually makes more sense than sending it to China is that in a lot of cases they're just baling it and then burying it. And that's what they do here in Calgary. Now that there's a City of Calgary program, is they just bury the plastic underground at the landfill. So very
Wow.
similar to what they do with regular garbage. But their whole thing is like, we're waiting to see if markets develop, and if they do, we'll dig this up. But in another roundabout way, all you have to do is wait another like 20 or 30 million years, and it'll just go back to being oil. So
Oh, God. Yeah, I don't think we have that much time. I've heard that there are, when there's like an oil spill and stuff, that they use like certain, I don't know, fungi, to like eat the plastic or eat the oil and stuff. Is that something that you are aware of, that could be a solution for all of
yeah,
this
I mean,
plastic?
I've heard of that. I think that the solution, like plastic, isn't really a problem in my view. It's more that what's a problem is that it ends up on the ground. It ends up in the river,
But
right?
doesn't it
If
end up in your ball sack too?
Yeah, well, and that's a bigger question
That
is
seems
like
like a
whether or not,
giant problem to me. I don't
yeah,
want that
whether
in my child's ball sack or yours or any man's ball sacks.
yeah. So that's a different question, I guess, is whether or not we should be using plastic. And I think that the
Yeah.
world has at least moved a little bit away from plastic food packaging and whatnot, and that people are becoming more aware that that's a bad idea. But I think we're in uh, this place though where like once we've used the plastic, like collecting it and putting it properly in a landfill to me doesn't seem like that's a problem. Like the world is not running out of space. We have space, and it's just a matter of whether that space is close to where people want to throw away their trash.
Well, do you think that it's, I mean, because I look at like whatever the space is, right? So if that space starts to deteriorate and then the plastic leaches into the soil or the water, and then it gets into our systems because of that, that's a concern for me, as a mom. And it's, I was just in Detroit, with my mom in the hospital, and I went out a couple times to eat, and I was at the hospital and all this stuff. I mean, they're still just using styrofoam. Here we go. Here's styrofoam. Everything's in plastic. I mean, there was zero conscientiousness about maybe we could think about something else. And it was such a like, what decade are we here in? And so we're not in a third world developing country. We're in, Michigan. And so it was just this like, and even here in Colorado, I was at this restaurant this weekend with my daughter and her friends, and we had a little to go thing, and it was Elon Musk's brother, Kimball Musk's place, the kitchen. And they're all, oh, everything's organic and blah blah blah, and they give you the to go thing, and the tray of the to go thing was like a you know cardboardish type thing, and then they put plastic on top. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. So it
Yeah,
just feels like there's there's such a disconnect with people understanding the truth about materials and what the best way to produce them and reuse them and whatnot. I was just at a basketball game last night with my kid and his dad and his girlfriend, and everything there was metal. Like they didn't have plastic water bottles; they were all aluminum water bottles. And I was like, okay, that makes sense because just like you said, metal makes more sense to recycle than plastic or glass. So I thought that was cool. But how do you think, like, and I'm going to segue this into Bitcoin, but like, where is the disconnect for the systems and the powers that be to like have some consensus on what are the truly the best practices that are in the highest and best good for humans and the earth, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I would say plastics are a bit of a double-edged sword because the sort of revolution of plastics that we saw over the last 100 or so years has revolutionized manufacturing of literally everything in the world, right? Like
Yeah,
injection molded plastics, like my headphones, my computer, my
right.
shoes,
The
like
lid here, everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's very useful and it's driven a massive amount of human prosperity. It's part of the most productive century of humanity's existence was the last one, and we made more strides. And a huge part of those strides was because of the fact that we were able to harness energy and materials in ways that we had never really been able to do before. And so
Mhm.
those strides have led to more human prosperity than anything else. The petroleum industry is the single most positive industry for the history of the world by such a wide margin that it's not even close. Like
Yeah.
literally billions of people have been saved by the oil and gas industry over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
That said, plastics in particular have become so cheap and so ubiquitous that they've become a big part of our disposable culture. And they're making cars almost entirely out of plastic these days, and
Mm.
we're at a point where you really cannot escape plastic in your life. Like it's everywhere, and it's gotten to the point where we've started to realize like maybe we don't want the plastic touching our food, right? Maybe we don't want the plastic touching our balls, like whatever it is. And it takes a little bit of effort to even avoid um, plastics at all in your life. And I think it's just sort of kind of creeping in, and this is, I hope, part of the very first stages. The saying of like weak men create good times create weak
It
men,
is. Yeah.
etc. Right?
Yeah.
So we're firmly in the weak men create hard times
Yeah.
section. We're
Very
like
firm.
we're like a third of the way into that portion of it. I think there's room for our political leaders to make things a lot worse before they start to get better. But I'd like to hope that we as Bitcoiners are part of the tip of the spear of people who are waking up to that,
Yeah.
and you know becoming the hard men that will create good times for future generations.
Yeah.
And
I,
that I think comes with the awareness of like even 10 years ago your water bottle might have been plastic. So
Oh, totally. And I remember, and it was the Nalgene, bottles that you got from REI or whatever. And they're like, oh, look, they're so rugged and strong. They can smash down if you're going hiking and they'll still be good. And, I mean, I think so much of everything is marketing. It's just communication and who's got control of the narrative and who's got the incentive to make the narrative a certain way. And I think a lot of people are so, hypnotized, as we talk about Heather with her Unhypnotized podcast. And I love her so much. So, again, thanks for introducing me to her. I love her. Um, we are walking around as a hypnotized culture, and it's by design, obviously, because there's profit on the other side and there's control on the other side of that hypnotized state of being. And so, it is, let me ask you this. Have you been like, because you're obviously, starting Bull Bitcoin and doing the Bitcoin rodeo and working with Bitcoin Well and having Bitcoin Brains as the first, hardware store. Um, was your, um, was your worldview before you got to Bitcoin? And obviously, you said you kind of started seeing the cracks in the system with the recycling. Like, had you been brought up conservatively? Have you been brought up like, I'm a free thinker hippie? I don't know. I'm just curious. Like, what's your background? Because you're clearly
yeah,
like very like fuck the system, which
yeah,
I love. So, you know, yeah. I'm just
yeah.
curious. Like,
That,
how?
that
What's the arc for your story?
yeah, that was something I had to learn on my own. I'm in like the most conservative city in probably in Canada.
Really?
Um, we're the Alberta is like we're always referred to as like the Texas of Canada.
Okay.
We're the oil industry here, and yet I grew up with very liberal parents.
Cool.
And the saying is always like, if you're not a liberal when you're 20, then you don't have a heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're 40, then you don't have a brain. And I basically just I followed that path pretty directly. I went to university here. I never really jived with the sort of like uh, stereotypical like follow the plan and fit in sort
Right.
of path. I'm a very rare high school and university dropout. It's hard to
Cool.
accomplish both of those, but I did, and yeah, I mean, I didn't really start seeing, and I would argue seeing the world for the way that it is until after I got into Bitcoin, and I got into Bitcoin like most people as a way to make some money. And for
Yeah,
me, money,
totally.
money, money meant dollars. And I was like, I want to mine some Bitcoin or buy some Bitcoin that I can sell for more dollars later, so that I can be rich or increase my standard of living or whatever else. All the reasons that people get into Bitcoin, and it was probably years. Back then there was no Bitcoin standard. There was no Sailor series on hard money. There was very little, very little content even discussing Bitcoin in that light. And a lot of the
Mhm.
stuff that was out there, when you look back at like, Roger Ver when he was a Bitcoiner, and Andreas Antonopoulos and all these people there, a lot of what they were selling was more the uh, usefulness as Bitcoin as a transactional tool, and a censorship resistant transactional tool at that,
Yeah.
but a peer-to-peer cash,
Yeah.
as was called in the white paper, and that I think was kind of a simplistic way of looking at it, because even though that's where Bitcoin is going, it kind of ignored that first vital step of the store of value, which is really what makes it so that something can even be a form of money. And it wasn't until there was a guy named Mirska Popescu that some people out there will know, who he was the first one that I read, really
Say his
talking
name
about
again. I don't know this name.
Mirska Popescu. And
Mirska Perpescu. Okay, keep
yeah,
going.
and he was a very early Bitcoiner who was really looking at it right from the start as like, fuck the government, fuck the state.
Mhm.
This is not a consensual relationship that I have with the state, and Bitcoin is my tool to emancipate myself from the chains that they have put on me from birth, essentially. And that was the first time that I heard that sort of framing of Bitcoin as this sort of like revolutionary tool to remove the ever expanding reach and power of the state that we've seen through our entire lives. It's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and it doesn't seem like we might have a brief reprieve here with the Doge stuff, where they're pruning some of the truly insane. But like, does anybody believe that the 2026 United States budget has a chance of being lower than the 2016 United States budget? Like,
No,
obviously not, right?
no.
So, um, and we're on that trajectory. And if we didn't have Bitcoin, we'd be fucked.
We would be so fucked. I mean, we would be so fucked on like a thousand levels. I don't know about you, but like, I mean, my mental health has been so much like exponentially better because of Bitcoin. I cannot imagine, like, I've I have many relationships in the world, and I have a lot of relationships with people from all colors of the spectrum, right? And I look at people who are in, outside of the Bitcoin space and don't understand Bitcoin, but they're still operating in this, the matrix. And I'm just like, it's fucking depressing. Like, it's so depressing, and I do my best to try to be you know, a gentle orange pillar. I used to try to orange pill pretty hard, and then I realized it's not effective in certain areas. So I'm just sort of like, how can I have a conversation about what people's pain points are? Marketing 101, and you know, understand them and have empathy, and then just talk about things that, like, what is impacting their life. And you were saying this earlier. I forget it was before or after we hit record, but like, if you push back a couple dots, from almost any argument or any situation, Bitcoin is a solution for many, many things. Again, whether it's a mental health thing, whether it's a family issue, whether it's the environment, whether it's the system, whether it's banking, it's like Bitcoin definitely it's not Windex in the Big Fat Greek Wedding, but it kind of is for many things. um, yeah, it's such a it's a trip, man. It is definitely a trip thinking about like the privilege that we have to have gotten the message, and not just gotten the message, but absorbed it. And now we have some energy behind activating it, and building this new system. Tell me how Bull Bitcoin came along with you and Francis.
Yeah, so it kind of came along as we had started working together. We were both in the business of selling Bitcoin, and so we were buying and selling from each other. Back then,
Cool.
there was a lot harder to get Bitcoin in Canada, especially for dealers, and so we all had to sort of buy and sell off of each other, and got to know Francis that way. And then where it all came from was during the block size wars. There was an attempt to form a consensus around a fork called Bitcoin Unlimited, and a bunch of people had gotten together, and big names in the space had signed on to support this Bitcoin Unlimited thing. And Francis and I were talking about this, and the thing that emerged from our talks was that the biggest issue was not even necessarily the block size change, although we did disagree with the technical details on the block size change. It was the fact that you had this group of people who had appointed themselves as sort of the deciders, the people who are going to be the ones making this change. And so we decided to organize a little bit and oppose that. And we wrote this letter that you can still find out there somewhere, that was basically like Canada opposes the Bitcoin Unlimited fork. And we got about 15 or 16, I think, Canadian Bitcoin companies to sign on to that letter. And that sort of spiraled into a group that, became part of the big opposition to the block size increase, and was eventually the No 2A faction. And as we got to know each other better through that, we kind of started talking about like essentially forming a Bitcoin super company in Canada. And we had talked to a couple other companies about getting them into the merger, and just couldn't get to the right terms. And eventually, we were like, we two are the most aligned when it comes to our values around Bitcoin, and what we actually want to achieve, and what we want to build, and sort of like the freedom tools that we want to empower people with, I guess, was the vision originally. And I haven't been involved in the company in a while on a day-to-day basis, but Francis has obviously built like a very world-class Bitcoin exchange. It's probably the best Bitcoin platform in the world, I would say, at this point. And
Yeah.
in terms of the tools that it gives, the freedom and privacy-minded, as well as the ability to buy Bitcoin without all the noise and nonsense of all the other coins, and also purely non-custodial, which is very important. And I think that's something that's very lacking
It's so
in a lot of
lacking. And
places in the world.
yeah, and I think that's such an important thing for folks to understand, like, because there's so many new people out there, like, I bought my Bitcoin. I'm like, where is it? You know, and that's the first question I like to ask folks. And oh, it's on Coinbase. It's here. I'm like, okay, it's not your Bitcoin then. You don't own Bitcoin. You have an IOU. And so I like how Bull Bitcoin just instantly, well, it's like, we're never touching your we're not holding it for you. It goes straight to your custody. And so, what's been your experience with, I'm doing a monthly Women in Bitcoin meetup in Denver. And so we have a variety of, it's always, when any meetup you go to, right? There's always like, complete newbies who don't even know, what a seed phrase is, all the way up to minor women and, different things. Like, how do you, emphasize the absolute importance of self-custody for people?
I mean, I think there's going to be an area here where sort of something in between self custody and the current custody model is going to be coming out.
Hmm.
We've been working on some things with both Bull Bitcoin and Bitcoin Well, and another company that I'm on the board on, because and I've had this conversation, for example, with Corey from Swan, where
Uh-huh.
they're an example where like they're a custodial platform, but they try to get everybody to take the Bitcoin off of there, right? And I think that's a good step, but the structure that they use still puts the funds of their customers at risk.
Totally.
And right now, something for Canadians that's actually a big worry is the fact that with our larger exchanges that are the shitcoin exchanges that trade everything and custody everybody's coins, um, all of those companies, in a roundabout way, one way or the other, are pretty much storing their Bitcoin in Coinbase or Fidelity custody. So they're regulated by the state of New York and the government of the United States, and that has nothing to do with me,
Yeah.
right? So it would be even more insane to trust a custodian that keeps your coins in a different country, let alone a country that you're like in a trade war with, right? Like
Exactly.
the chances that we get to a point where Trump decides to take 20% off the top of all Canadians' bitcoins held in Canada, that doesn't seem super far fetched at all, or held in the U.S., right? And so,
No, I
um,
know. Well, we look at like a 6102 order here, and it's just sort of like, okay, anyone who's got Bitcoin anywhere, it's
yeah,
ours
well,
because
and
it's national security. Uh,
yeah,
like
exactly.
we need
And
to confiscate all your stuff. And so, what do you think about solutions like Unchained or the Bitcoin Advisor or Anchor Watch? Who are doing collaborative custody.
yeah, so those are a good step for sure. There is um, like an added layer of complexity when you get into multi-sig like that,
Hmm.
and not everybody wants to do that. That ends up being the big barrier, and that's
Yeah.
why most companies haven't gone to that point. And that tends to be with the non-custodial companies, where you get a big drop off from a product standpoint of customers going through the flow of the product. They get to the point where they have to enter their Bitcoin address, and they're like, "Oh shit, I don't have one,"
Yeah.
and then you lose clients at that point. And so adding that multi-sig and everything like that, I think that's a good idea for somebody holding a larger amount who has the time to set that up and sort of uh, take their journey into Bitcoin more seriously. That's a great way to go. But I think there's a new model. I don't know what we're going to be calling it yet. It's technically functions a lot like custody, but it uses a different legal model. And so there's a couple companies that have set up regulated trust companies here in Alberta, and we've been working with one of them that uses something called bailment, which
Bailment.
basically, yeah, it basically means that the coins. So when you put your coins in Coinbase or Swan or one of these custodial exchanges, you don't own the coins. You have an IOU from the company for the coins. And that means you're a creditor of this company and you're an unsecured creditor. So
Yeah.
if they go bankrupt and uh, they end up with a giant hack, as always happens, especially if they're trading all these other coins, like inevitably, like, and this is 100% certainty that at some point Coinbase will be hacked because of Ethereum. It's 100% certain.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of when. And whether or not they're solvent after that fact is a big thing. And we've seen with like the FTX bankruptcy, Mt. Gox, our own version in Canada with Quadriga, that when these things go into bankruptcy, the people holding their coins in those exchanges end up getting pennies on the dollar.
Right.
And that's because they're weighed against all of the assets of the company. Whereas with this bailment model, the end user retains full legal title to their coins. And because it's a trust company, this trust company is able to hold their coins without transferring the title to themselves. So there's no IOUs involved. There's still no coins held by like the retailer, the company that sells the coins.
Hmm.
That I think is really important. Is if you are going to hold your coins with anybody, they should be somebody who just does that,
I like
right?
that. I think that's obviously a much more intelligent model. What's the business model there? Are they taking like a point? What are they taking
Yeah,
a percent?
they'll charge an annual fee. It's a lot lower than that. It's more like 50 or 60 bips. So
Okay.
like
Yeah, that's
very
what Anchor
very
Watch is doing. They're at like 0.55. So,
yeah,
um,
exactly.
yeah. And whatever. My ex-husband had a hedge fund, and so I'm very familiar with people like having the normal, 2 and 20 or whatever you're doing, you're used to paying fees. I mean, but again, like if you're looking at, whatever 50, 60 bips basis points, for people who don't know what that is, it's just like a half a percent, half a percent, 0.6%. um, when you've got a lot of money, that does add up over time. However, it's just your insurance policy, and it's just basically like, what's your insurance policy on $1 million house? Like how much does it cost you? 6 grand a year. That's zero point 0.6. That's 60 beeps. So um, it's just getting your head around that, I think, especially as people who are like, you know, uh, screw this, I don't want my money in the system, da 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 da. It's just kind of like, okay, cool. Go do, dig a hole in your yard and put your seed plate in it. Awesome. Like do that. But there's other people who are especially, more uh in the legacy system who are just they don't want to they're not interested in doing that type of custody for themselves, especially if you're a company, and so um, So I think, being open-minded is super important as a Bitcoiner, because there's no like one size fits all for how you're going to custody your generational wealth,
Yeah.
and your freedom. And so obviously to me, I think about like, okay, does it make sense to have like a chunk that is, really, really ultra cold like that? And then have something where it's like, oh, if I got to get out of Dodge, like I don't need to go call up the trust to transfer some stuff for me. It's just, I got it. And so there's layers and ways that can organize your wealth.
Yeah. And I look at it as like a way to get into the space.
Yeah.
Like the people that that leave right at that point where they could be putting their own address in, and they decide I don't want to learn this, but maybe what they're deciding is I don't want to learn this yet.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, what I've seen in the past, especially back in the day when we didn't have nearly as good of infrastructure for storing your Bitcoin, there was a question at one point. There was a time when we all stored our Bitcoin with no hardware wallets because they didn't exist, and then there was a point in time where it was like, is it worth it to put some of my money into a hardware wallet? Also, is this
Yeah.
better served going to this than going to Bitcoin? And in a lot of cases, what ended up happening was people would put some money into Bitcoin, and back then the saying was always don't put money in that you can't afford to lose. I think that's shifted to only put money in that you can't afford to lose. And, but the way that I always say is don't put money in that you need soon,
Yeah.
because it's obviously still very volatile, and all of our prices are in dollars, so that can be an issue. But um, what ends up happening is you put some money in, and then you get to your second cycle, you're 4 years in, and all of a sudden the money that you put in is worth putting a lot more attention into,
Yeah.
right? And it becomes a lot bigger percentage of your net worth, and at that point, these people who've used a fairly easy to facilitate custodial system that is much safer than the way that exchanges are doing it now, the way that has proven time and time again that it has the potential to burn people.
Yeah.
Um, I think it can be a gateway to the self custody and a gateway to um, taking that extra layer of sovereignty. Because really, like you get about 2/3 of the benefits of owning Bitcoin if you just have price exposure, I would say, and the rest you in fact need to hold it yourself.
Yeah, and it's layered, it's like a step-by-step type process. And I know, when I first started learning about Bitcoin, like now it's going to be almost 4 years ago. I'm still, I still consider myself a total noob, but I'm like a nerdy noob. Um, but like when I was like, I had some Bitcoin on uh, Coinbase, and I'm like, well, I don't want to mess this up. It's like whatever, $1,000. It wasn't a whole bunch of money, but it was like $1,000 is a lot to me, and I didn't want to lose it. So I was like, well, I'm going to hire somebody who's like a Bitcoin security person, and it was like Good Guy Biker. And I'm like, teach me how to put this on my cold storage so I don't mess it up. And even though Ben BTC Sessions is the best, and he's got the best tutorials ever. If you guys don't know who I'm talking about, go follow BTC Sessions, the best. And check out Bitcoin Mentor also. Like those guys are rocking it. But this was obviously Bitcoin Mentor is, what I did, 4 years ago, but minus having the company. But some people like, I'm older, I'm not this like cryptographer girl or something, and I'm not a developer, and I'm like, I don't want to mess this up, because if this does grow, I don't want to make a mistake and then all of a sudden go, oops, I didn't put the right code in or the digits, or I messed something, whatever. And so I think for many people, like to feel comfortable having their hands held, is no shame. There's no shame in like going step by step, but really making sure whoever's guiding you knows what the heck they're talking about, right? Um, and it's kind of like, how do you know the person who's guiding you isn't going to like, ha ha ha, I'm going to put my address in instead of yours? So it's
Yeah.
like, DYOR, do your own research, everybody, and make sure you feel comfortable. I mean, like what's happened with Lynn Alden and Larry Lepard with their Twitter accounts. Did you see what went on like recently?
Not really. No, I'm a
They
little
got
out
hacked.
of the
Like,
loop on Twitter drama.
yeah, well, like this recently, like there's been like this really super duper big old hack with Bitcoiner accounts. And those guys are like the shit, right? And so even if they can get hacked in this kind of, and it was a social hacking type thing, because it was like, hey, we're from Forbes magazine or blah blah blah, and we want to interview you because we love your book. And you click on the link, and then somehow it all of a sudden gives them access to your Twitter account. I have no idea, I don't know how that works, but like the sophistication of hacks out there are so intimidating. And then I think they just keep getting worse and worse and worse. And the more that we have exposed, financially, it's kind of like, are we doing the $5 wrench attack, or are we getting, cyber attacked? How do you tell people to stay secure? Like, what are some advice, that you would give to people listening who are like, I don't want to get hacked, or, any of that?
Well, the first thing you should do is never go on Bitcoin podcasts.
Definitely don't go. Only go on a
Yeah,
music podcast with a chick and a pink hat.
yeah. There's value in anonymity, certainly.
Yeah.
There's like some security in anonymity. Um, but yeah, I mean, we're getting to a point where it's not just Bitcoin. All of our lives are so digital that really just
Yeah.
basically everybody needs to have some familiarity with, basic phishing and how to spot those things, and just operating with a little bit of caution. It's like my son is 9, and he's just kind of getting to be able to use the internet a little
Yeah.
bit without
Uh-huh.
much supervision. And I'm having to teach him like about don't click on links. Like, people will try to steal from you, people will try to harm you in some way online, and it's really unfortunate, but it's just kind of how the world is, and you need to be on guard for that. Really, you need to be aware of what you're putting in your computer and what you're putting on your phone, and where your weak points are, because having your Bitcoin stolen is probably the most obvious one that we all think of, but we've got all these other valuable digital assets like our Twitter accounts,
Yeah.
our domains that
Yeah.
that are potentially attackable by bad actors. And so I would shout out that one good security tip that I would give is a company that I'm just in the process of switching all my domains and hosting over to after going through some of their security procedures and whatnot with them, is a company called EasyDNS, and they've
E
got
Say it,
Easy
spell it out.
EasyDNS.
Like EASY
Yeah,
DNS? Okay.
yeah, and they're good Canadian-based company that is run by a Bitcoiner, and they take the security seriously the way that you'd expect from a company run by a Bitcoiner. So
I love it. I know there's so many, like, again, when I deal with, normies or people, like most of my family, they're not Bitcoiners. They still think I'm insane. That's okay. It's like, I've saved a little Bitcoin for you guys on the side, and it's gone up. So you're welcome. Uh, one day you'll be a believer. Uh, but like, when I do talk about security, and again, I'm not like some cyber expert or anything, but I'm like, you need to have 2FA, you need to do all these other things. And they're like, nobody's going to, I'm like, oh my God, and, uh, somebody I know in my family, I'm not going to say who it was, but they got, they clicked the button and it was too good to be true. Like, oh, we're going to, send us $1,000 and we're going to send you 2,000 or whatever it was, some stupid thing. And, of course I'm getting all the alerts, and it was just like, okay, this is like the dude from Nigeria or whatever who's gonna, and like
yeah,
it's just, and especially when you're desperate, if you're somebody who, and I'm not saying my family members were desperate, but when you're in a position, anybody, who's feeling, uh, disempowered, if you're feeling broke, if you don't have a lot of energy or time, and something shows up and it appears to be this magical solution for you, when I know like what it's like to feel down and out, and so when something shows up and it feels that way, you're like, "Psh, well, what have I got to lose?" And you click on it and something happens, that makes it even worse for your life, and so I mean, not to be negative, but it's like you have to be a hyper vigilant
yeah,
individual in this world. You have to be. If you're not, like you're the prey for these predators. And
yeah,
they just one after the other, So if it's not you, it's the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. And so I just feel like it's definitely like being a Bitcoiner has completely shifted my view of security and privacy and safety. I mean, obviously I'm out there,
yeah,
but just security wise, I feel like it's taught me a lot.
yeah. And I'm just gonna turn off my camera for 1 sec because I realized I forgot my coffee inside,
Oh yeah, I
and I
do.
need I need a coffee with this cigar. But
You can't live without. Have you had the El Salvador coffee, like from um Oh my God. There's the volcano coffee. There's, oh my God, come on. Chorritos coffee. Have you had any El Salvador coffee there, Dave?
No, I haven't. I haven't. I'm not. I've been skeptical of El Salvador the whole time, but
Really?
um, yeah. I mean, I'm not. I'm
Do
not
me a
one to
favor, go to
trust.
your go to your settings and make sure that you're on like go to your like the gear icon and just hit it and make sure you're on high def or whatever the high res is for your video because you're a little greeny.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
There we go.
All right.
Um, but yeah, I've been skeptical. I'm not prone to trust any government,
Yeah,
and we're starting
totally.
to see that with the stuff coming up with the IMF loans, and maybe we can trust this guy, but for how long and on what is the question with El Salvador. So I've been broadly skeptical on the sort of like rosy picture that they're painting of like, don't worry, we're the Bitcoin government, we're the government for Bitcoiners, and it feels like a honeypot to me.
I mean, it's one of those things that I look at everything. I mean, this is like, what is it? Bitcoin's a teenager at this point. And so it's so young. It's such a young experiment, and so the fact that it's starting to hit mainstream, and then now these, within the last couple of years, the governments are starting to wake up. Who the heck knows what's going to happen tomorrow here in the United States with their bullshit crypto summit? Um, bleh. Um, I don't trust anything that I can't look behind the curtains. If I can't see what's going on, like and connect the dots, as far as I'm concerned, it's just one big psyop smokescreen bullshit, and someone's benefiting, and I'm not that one. Uh, I might be uh, told that I'm the one so that I can keep putting up my little cheerleader thing, but it doesn't mean that's accurate. And so I'm totally with you with, I don't trust the government. I don't trust systems. Certainly don't trust anything bureaucratic. Um, but it's the most concentration of power to play the game for a little while. And so it's what's interesting though, it's like they're playing the game with the tool, Bitcoin and the network of Bitcoin that is it's not under their control,
Yeah,
and that's what makes that I think very cool and interesting.
yeah, and they don't really see Bitcoin for what it is whatsoever.
Yeah,
If they did, they'd be very against it, right? Because
totally. They
the
can't
the
control it.
the Bitcoin will be the technology that ends the government of the United States unequivocally. The United States as a country will cease to exist, and Bitcoin will be the reason. That's almost a certainty at this point, I would say. But what the politicians have seen is that first, I think the first thing that they saw is a voter block, right? A bunch of people who are very much single issue voters who will die on this hill.
Yeah.
The free Ross thing was probably the easiest way
You're us.
to buy a bunch of votes, and
Yeah.
that's great. But that's something that governments love to do. Is they
Yeah.
crack down on your freedoms, or in this case, obviously, very significantly, the freedoms of one person,
Hmm.
and then they're in a position to give them back and seem like they're benevolent when they give them back. And the fact is that the very structure that allowed the imprisonment of Ross Ulbricht in the first place was evil.
Yeah.
That was wrong. That was a power system that neither he nor any of us have opted into. And he was the victim of that power system and the victim of all the money moving behind the scenes. And what I think is going on now is that Bitcoin has just gotten big enough to the point where it's starting to be part of the money moving behind the scenes. And I think that the obvious next step that they've realized is that Bitcoiners and the crypto industry as a whole can be a source of contributions, money, bribes, essentially,
Mhm.
right? And we're seeing that in very clear terms right now with this administration that like obviously the shitcoiners who printed their own money have a lot more money to pay bribes with,
Yeah.
and you see that in the form of Justin Sun's $75 million donation to Trump, and suddenly his SEC charges get dropped, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing really different that's going on. This administration is profiting from the fact that the absurdity of the spending had gotten so extreme to the point where it was just like the Democrats and the sort of globalist elite that backed the Ukrainian war and that rule most of Europe. They were in full looting mode. They were just grabbing as much money for themselves and their own pet projects as they could,
Yeah.
and that's where you see these things where it's just like millions of dollars going to like like support girls' climate action in Peru, and it's like
Yeah.
Like that's the dumbest thing I can think of, and it it's gotten so extreme that now just by canceling those things they seem like the good guys, right? But in fact, like they're still sending billions of dollars to foreign countries for war, and they're still printing money without our consent. They're still stealing from us, and they're still spending the money that they steal in ways that are a net negative. Like, let alone not just the spending. If the entire government went away and we still had to pay the same amount in terms of inflation and taxes, I think that'd be a net positive.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit, because this is like a common argument I hear and I have conversations with folks. The reality is, okay, Dave, if you and I decided to be roommates, there's going to have to be some type of a governance structure of like, does the toilet seat go up or down? We have to have an agreement. Oh, do you put the toothpaste upside down or this way? You know? And so I don't care. The minute you have two people or more who have to come together in any situation and have agreements, that's called governance. And so um, the idea of that this is going to create, the government's going to collapse and this and that. I'm like, yep, that's the, rinse and repeat throughout all history. And so there are times when things have to get so big and bloated and disgusting that they explode and they have to collapse, and then there's that time of chaos and disorder, but then there is some other sense of order and structure that comes through it, and so is it like Lord of the Flies, when the kids are on the island and it's like, okay, piggy pass the conch, and it's like there's always going to be some set of agreed upon rules, and not everyone's going to want to follow them, and not everyone's going to agree that, oh, this is how I think they should be and I lost the vote. And so there's always going to be some clashing when you have one or more, two or more humans that come together. And so it's like, with that said, what is the way that we can move forward and realize, like, government is never going to go away. It's not,
Yeah,
this particular version of it, or maybe these folks in it, but like, there's always going to be institutions, there's always going to be configurations, there's always going to have to be something, to keep the wheels on the bus going round and round, and so what do you think about that? I mean, there's never going to be no government.
yeah. I think we're entering a time, and a lot of these ideas come from a book called The Sovereign Individual that I would highly
Yeah,
recommend anybody read.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think we're entering a time where um, we're going to end up with a lot more countries in the world. We're probably 10, 15 years from now that instead of being 300 or so countries in the world, there's probably going to be 5,000, because the day of the large scale nation state is over. That's my hypothesis. And I think we have to go right back to the idea of where does the need for the nation state come from? What is the foremost purpose of that, right? And really, when it comes down to it, it's the protection of physical safety and property rights. Those are the very fundamental things that were
Mhm.
first, that really, when you look at it, like what the state is humans banding together to form a monopoly on violence to protect their resources, right? And that's the part that there will always be a place for, because otherwise someone else will steal your resources inevitably.
Yep.
There is a need for um, some rule of law, right?
Yeah.
And you do need a concentration of violence and a monopoly on violence in a given area to be able to enforce a rule of law. But I think what we're going to end up in is a scenario with so many different small countries in the world where those countries will end up competing for the best users, the best citizens, the best customers. And
Mhm.
that's the way that they should be looking at us, as customers of services that they provide. And right now, the bundle that they do, it's like you got your bundle with your cable, and you got, like, you want to get the sports channel, but you have to get these six other channels, and you don't want those six other channels. But right now, we're at such a point, it's like we want the one channel and we have 150,000 other channels that we have to pay for that we don't want.
Yeah.
And that's the position that we're in a place where the scope of the government is so far out of control
Yeah.
that it doesn't resemble anything like what the original purpose of the state would be. And so
Exactly.
I think we'll end up in a scenario where there will be some countries, and I hope one of them will be here. Colorado probably stands a good chance of being a country like this, where they compete by offering the cheapest prices for the best rule of law.
Is
And
it,
that's the main thing.
is it free and open cities? Are you familiar with that project?
Yeah.
Is that kind of similar? It's been a while since it's, a couple of years, I think, since I've listened to some of the podcasts, but is that sort of the philosophy there?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't dug. I'm only loosely familiar with that, but I do think that we'll end up with a lot more governance at the city level and like the regional
The
level.
micro, yeah.
If I think about the further away that I go from home, the less I'm going to identify with the people that I see. Right. So um, if I'm in Calgary here, if I go to the rest of Alberta, I'm going to find a lot in common with those people, but not necessarily even as much as I find with those here in Calgary. And if I go to Toronto, like it feels like I'm in a different world, let alone a different country. Like it's nothing like here at all. And our cultural values and our way of life is so different that I don't think it makes sense for these large scale countries to persist like this. And um, there's really no benefit for us on this end of the country to being part of Canada. Like our biggest benefit is the hockey team, to be honest. Like we love having a good national hockey team, and everybody was very happy that Canada beat the U.S. in that recent tournament. But like that only happens every like 4 years, and we don't get enough out of the country to merit paying such a large percentage of our wealth to pay for the rest of the country, which is the situation in Canada. We're the oil rich province. We basically pay for the roads in Toronto and everywhere else, and that it's just a bad deal. And I think eventually we're going to be put in a situation where when citizens are forced into a bad deal, they have choices, right? They have the ability to move away from that bad deal, and we're starting to see that, and that's why El Salvador is an appealing place for many people, is because they
Yeah.
they really saw the bad deal and started saying, "Hey, we'll give you a better deal over here." And in a lot of the ways that they offered the deal, that originally it was going to be you invest 3 Bitcoin and you can get citizenship, and then it became you had to pay the 3 Bitcoin to get citizenship, and the deal isn't quite as good as they said it would be, but they're still getting the first bits of the idea right. But I think when a country comes around and says, not only are we going to be pro Bitcoin, and I think there's room to take that a lot further than just saying we'll buy some as a country, we'll mine some as a country. Legal tender I think is virtually meaningless. That's the government forcing people to do something. I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah.
But if a government were to say, and there's a window for this right now, if a government were to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible and then say, hey, we're dropping out of the IMF, we're not in this system of control anymore, and we have this big stockpile of Bitcoin, we're going to issue our own currency backed by this Bitcoin, very much like the gold standard. And not only that, but we're going to run a government that aligns with the principles that most Bitcoiners would agree with. So we're going to run a government that is very lean, provides a very minimal level of services, and as a result, doesn't get in the way of our citizens running their businesses, living their lives, and really just provides those basic things that we actually need from the government, and we actually need from whoever it is that has that monopoly on violence. We need them to protect us, we need to protect our property, and frankly, not much else. I don't see any other area in the world where any government at all is doing a good job of literally anything else, like healthcare, education, anywhere in the world, not even one. So
I know. It's definitely, I always ask people, I'm like, what is the best vision or example that is alive right now of a government, that you think is like functioning well, Um, a lot of times people come up with these socialist things like, well, everybody gets school and everybody gets this and they get the health care. And I'm like, yeah, you've got to wait for a year to get an appointment or a surgery, or, your education is a vanilla one size fits all thing. So it has zero um, uh, ability to propel people way forward who are ready to go forward and capable, versus people who are just like in the medium of the bell curve kind of thing, in the median. And so it's a tough one. I mean, managing giant groups of humans, I don't want to do that. That would be
yeah.
like, no thanks.
Well, and
Um,
that's a fundamental flaw in the concept of government, I think, too, is because most of the most competent people that I know would have absolutely no interest in being in charge of a government, right?
no,
It sounds like a terrible job, to be honest.
yeah,
And the only thing that could make it a good job is the way that the politicians use it now, which is the ability to steal a whole bunch of money.
yeah,
right? And so that really is the main thing that drives people to politics is just this lust for power and money.
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of like this weird thing that some people have where they really just get off on that power. They
Oh, they
really
do.
want to be in charge, and I think that's why
100%.
we see so many pedophiles among politicians as well, is because it's the same kind of dimension, right? It's dementia. It's people who get off on power who seek both of those things. It's like I want to inflict my power on somebody who has less power than me, and that to me is like one of the most demented things in the world. Whether it's children or taxes, it's fucking weird to want to control other people.
Well, and that looks, and thinking of, Heather and other things, and I work with different people and do, you know, coaching and help them move forward with their lives and design their future. But like you're you're replaying the past, right? So if you had somebody, right, that had a power over you when you were a child or a teenager, or you witnessed that in your family, but most importantly, it happened to you, that just keeps trickling forward, and there's something in your spirit, your consciousness, that wants to resolve that somehow. And a lot of ways people think that they resolve it is by putting it upon someone else. And so, you see that with, like, the guy who gets yelled at by his boss and he comes home and beats his wife up. You see the kid who didn't get picked for a game at when they were children, and then now they're being, exclusive and telling everyone to fuck off. So there's all these different ways that, um, if we don't understand our past, as individuals, we're going to be destined to repeat it somehow. And until you get that kind of resolution and clarity, it turns into this absolutely disgusting deformity, and you think about, uh, I don't know about you, but like, remember the hall monitors and the kids who would make sure you had your hall pass to go pee when you're in third grade? Like, they just wanted to have that power, like, in making sure, that you had the right thing. And so, I'm going to tell you a quick story, if you don't mind. I remember I was brutally terrorized and bullied when I was in sixth and seventh grade. And I lived in Arizona. There's lots of gangs there, and this was back in the 80s. And I was terrified to go into seventh grade because I got, they were like toilet papering my house and all egging my house. And I didn't even know what the fuck was going on and who these people were. And I show up in seventh grade, and for almost a whole year, I'm getting, like, just bullied by this group of girls, and they're like, "You can't go to the mall. We're going to cut you and kill you." And I'm like, "Oh my God." Like, I don't even know you. What did I do wrong? And it was just like, I was just the easy target, and I was just, for the whole year, I was just in this state of terror, and I was scared to go do anything. Um, and I moved around every 2 years, so I didn't have like some hardcore crew. And I just remember one day I saw this girl who was one of the terrorists, as it were. And she was in the classroom, and I was like, "Get a hall pass, come out," because I was just like, I wanted to confront her finally. I wanted to confront the bully. So she gets the hall pass, she comes out, and we go in the, this end way of the hall so nobody could see us. And I was like, "Here I am, beat me up. You've been wanting to beat me up for, these last 2 years. Take your shot." And she was just like, "Fuck you, blah, blah, blah," and I'm like 13 years old or 14 years old. And she was just like cursing me out. And I was just like, "Well, fuck you." So I've started the fight, and so we started punching each other and brawling. And I finally got her down on the ground, and I had her by the hair, and I was like ready to just punch her in the face and knee her in the face too. And I'd already punched her, and she's like bloody all over her face. And I'm not proud of this, but I'm proud of the fact that I stood up for myself. But I just looked at her because I was like, "Uncle, you ready? You done?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "All right, come on, let's go in the bathroom and get you cleaned up." So I brought her into the bathroom to help her get cleaned up. And she just, started bawling and crying, and I was like, "I don't even know you. Like, why are you picking on me? What's wrong with, what did I do to you?" She was like, "Nothing. They made me do it. My stepdad, beats me up, and I'm just upset." And, so it was like all this poor girl's trauma traumatized me, and at such a young age. And so it was just this, like, exponentially multiply that by 8 billion people, right? And so it's like, that's what's going on in our power structures out there, is we've got so much unresolved trauma in the world, and then it gets hidden in their shame, and then it just oozes out the side into pedophilia or into all these other things that are disgusting. And so it's like, until we can take an opportunity to look inside and look at what's really wrong, that needs to be loved. I don't want to say wrong, but has been wounded and needs to be healed. We're never going to heal the systems. We're never going to heal anything. And so I think, it's imperative, to have radical self-responsibility as a Bitcoiner and as somebody who wants to make the world a better place, to like take time to look within. And it's like, how are your old wounds, polluting your environment, and how is it trickling out? And so, um, I don't know. I just had to go on that
Yeah.
little rant.
Yeah, I'm with you though. I think, and this kind of goes back to the conversation about the scams too. I think that the world, the way that it is now, has gotten so distorted because of the money printing, as we always talk about, right?
Right.
The fact is that one of the core functions that money is supposed to perform is it's supposed to link your actions to the outcome for your life,
Yeah.
right? So the harder you work, the more resources you're supposed to have to spend on your life. And the fact is that that link has been profoundly broken because the money
Yeah.
that we earn is broken.
Yeah.
And so in the world the way that it is today, there are just a lot of people dealing with a lot of hopelessness. There's a lot of people dealing with the fact that they don't think they can get out from under the debt, out from under the, they're in a job that hasn't gotten that much of a raise in the last 10 years, but their rent is triple what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that leads people in a bunch of directions that are not healthy for them or anyone else. One of them is that are those power games, where people try to exert power over others, but that also extends to both the scammers and the scammees.
Yeah.
So there's much more of an incentive to become a scam artist in the world right now, because it's a way that you can actually make some money, as compared to the rest of the world, where the ability to sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, the proverbial American dream, is no longer as reachable for people really anywhere in the world, let alone America.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, something that we see both at Bitcoin Well and Bull Bitcoin is there's a lot of people who are victims of these scam artists who are
Yeah.
pushed to Bitcoin, and they're pushed to Bitcoin because it's a way for the scammers to get the money from them without it being reversible or traceable. And having talked to a bunch of these people, we've prevented a whole lot of scams. And a very common thing that comes up in there is the fact that, especially with older people, they feel like they've taken the path that was presented to them as living a righteous life. They went and they got a university degree. They went and worked their whole lives. They saved money. They had RSPs and pensions and savings, and they're in these spots where they're like, oh, I got $300,000 saved up for retirement, and that even 10 years ago would have seemed like an okay amount to have as a retirement. And nowadays, if you're 65 years old and you got $300,000, like, that's not going to take you another 20 years.
No.
And so it's gotten to this point where these people feel like they've got to do something, and that leads them to taking more and more insane risks with their money.
Exactly.
And really, it's one of the ways that, because the world's so fucked, people are just not treating each other well as a whole across the world and the economy, and that trickles down into everything from that's why there's so much demented bullshit in the world right now.
Totally. And I think about, like, I was on a Spaces, I don't know, maybe a month ago, and it was I never go on crypto Spaces, but for whatever reason, I was like, I'm going to go do some recon, and see what's happening over here. And like literally all the speakers were like the little Lego picture, pixelated pictures. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna listen to these folks. And, one of the guys is just like, oh, I'm a Bitcoin maxi, but I do crypto. I was like, fuck, okay, I'm gonna raise my hand. So they let me up, and I was like, so I want to learn, like, you guys like do this crypto stuff, and that you're rug pulling people. And they're like, yeah, we're just doing it so we can buy Bitcoin because Bitcoin's better because I'm a Bitcoin maxi. And I was like, no, you're not. Um, that's not how it works. I'm like, there's no. But they're just like, you don't know what it's like out here. We're hustling and it's super hard. I'm like, dude, I'm from Detroit. I don't know what the fuck it's like. I live in my car. I don't want to hear about your bullshit, And so it was just, but there was no consciousness around that you're extracting value from other people, and so it was just this like, they didn't care. It was just like, how quick can I get some money so I can get some Bitcoin? And I was like, oh my gosh, and I understand, I get everybody wants to get Bitcoin, but like they were justifying, the means to the end kind of thing. And it was just, and they're all, it was young, it was a young group of guys, probably, all guys, maybe one girl. But they're just like, we're hustling out here and we can't get by. And so this is helping us, and I get it. And that's why people turn to selling drugs. That's why, some women turn to being, strippers or only fans, because it's just like, well, it's better than working at Starbucks, and I get it, and so it's like this money is obviously so broken that they're hustling and they're just barely above water breathing, and so again, when somebody throws you a floaty and it's in the shape of a little, monkey picture, you're like, okay, you know,
Yeah,
it sucks. And it's like, I feel for everybody. And it's like, I don't want to keep perpetuating that cycle, but I want to help younger people, especially understand like there's different ways to like save and get ahead, but it's like, even you think about little kids getting out of college, what are you going to get? A $60,000 a year job? You can't pay rent here in almost any city, plus groceries, plus insurance, plus food. Oh, I'd like to have a new pair of shoes because these ones have holes in it. Like, you're not getting by on 60, 80, 100 grand anymore. Forget it. Um, so it's a tough one, man. It's like, I really feel, I don't know. Do you think everything has to completely disintegrate and collapse before we get a reset, or are we going to be able to duct tape and MacGyver this thing together?
yeah. I mean, there's bound to be different levels of collapse in different places.
Yeah.
Back to the sovereign individual, that predicted that Canada would be the first major nation state to break up, and I think
Mm,
the likelihood of that is very high. The whole trade war makes it more likely. Um, we don't need, like, we in Alberta especially, we have no interest in being in a trade war with the United States. We
yeah.
export a ton of oil to the United States. We'd like to export even more oil to the United States. We'd like to have pipelines going there to export oil more safely and efficiently. And I think we're going to see countries break up, and we will probably see some places, like we've already seen some countries, these short periods of hyperinflation and the sort of abject poverty that leads to.
Yeah.
That's not done. We'll see more of that for sure in our lifetimes. Um, that may come to our countries as well at some point. But yeah, I mean the phrase "gradually then suddenly," is has been adopted by Bitcoiners for a reason, because I think that's very likely how a collapse in the Western world is likely to go.
Yeah.
When the day comes when the dollar loses its final pieces of purchasing power, it'll probably be very much like the bank collapses that we've seen in the last year, where they kick the can until Friday, everything starts to go to shit in the afternoon on Friday, and then they're like, everything falls apart over the weekend, and by Monday we have an entirely new structure
Yep.
that we're told is the new thing. Um, these people in the political class, these people in power, will go to any lengths whatsoever to keep their slice of power. And
Of
so
course.
I think they're going to kick the can down the road as far as they can. And yeah, I mean, it's there's probably going to be some messiness. The currencies collapse, and I do think that even in the next 5 years, we're probably going to see most of the currencies in the world collapse.
Let me ask you this, because I think this is, I forget who, Charles Eisenstein, he was talking about like nature-based currencies and resource-based currencies. And, you know, it- on the topic of how many more minutes do you got? I know we're over the hour. Like, how are you
Yeah,
doing on time?
I,
Little
I got
bit?
lots of time.
Okay, cool. Like, because we've got two ideologies right now, right? We're looking at centralized, things and decentralized things, right? And you were talking about having 5,000 countries. We don't want 5,000 currencies, and that's different because and it's like Bitcoin is not centralized, but it's unified. It's one system that's it operates in a decentralized nature. However, is this something that you see, like, if we're working in a 5,000 country world, is it logical to think we're going to be able to operate on a Bitcoin standard, or is it something where it's like, well, we're going to have the Bitcoin base layer, and then each the 5,000 countries are going to issue their, whatever Colorado token or something. What do you think?
Um, I think that countries will try to keep fiat alive as long as they can, and we'll
Yeah.
probably see a wave of fiat currencies backed by Bitcoin, which is an infinitely better idea
Well,
than
hold on,
backed
hold on.
by
Fiat,
nothing.
because fiat isn't backed by anything. Fiat is just by
Well,
decree. So what do you mean
yeah,
by
it's
that?
so they would be the decree involved here would be them saying we have this many Bitcoin and we decree that we only have this many dollars, essentially, right? And so dollars backed by Bitcoin or whatever the new currency you'd want to call them is, Bitcoin bucks or whatever.
Okay.
Um, so very much in the same way that that fiat currency was once backed by gold, on the gold standard, that it wasn't actually gold. It was backed by the credit and faith of the U.S. government. And I think we'll see that again. We'll see countries move to that kind of system, and then inevitably some of those countries will abuse that. And in a world where we have 5,000 countries, I don't think it's realistic for a large percentage of them to be competing for their own fiat currency on top of Bitcoin. There might be some usefulness where some regional currencies might work like that, but in essence, what they'll all be competing with Bitcoin and with each other for is like, how honest are they? And if a country were to issue a currency that was denominated in satoshis and one-to-one backed, um, and we could trust them, that would be pretty close to as good as Bitcoin. But the reality is that we probably won't be able to trust them. And so even if it starts out as one-to-one backed, at some point they will issue more of the currency than they have Bitcoin in order to spend it. And that's just been, a ubiquitous thing that we've seen in every monetary system in the world, is that if anybody has the ability to make money for free, they will, and they'll spend it.
But if we look at, I mean, if you think about, obviously Bitcoin can be, you know, reduced to a Satoshi. Why would anybody want anything else than a SAT? Because I look at
Yeah,
like stable coins, I look at, Tether and all this stuff, and I'm still trying to get my little brain around that. And I do understand it to some degree, but it's still just like, at some point, if we get on a Bitcoin standard, and anybody who would issue anything other than just sending sats through lightning or whatever the new technology is going to be, would seem like a scam, you
yeah, and
know
I mean, I can definitely see that. If the market was perfectly efficient, we'd already be on a Bitcoin standard, right? And where the potential future viability for those like kind of second layer fiats on top of Bitcoin comes from the fact that there is like a large incumbency bias to money.
yeah.
That's why the dollar still
Hmm.
exists. That's why we still use, something like the Canadian dollar has no reason to exist. Um, so I think that there will be some competition in the world driven by that kind of inefficiency, and though there's realistically going to be a lot of trade-offs that like people don't necessarily understand the differences between. So if you were to look at something like the Liquid network,
Hmm.
where it's not a trustless system whatsoever, it's a trust-based system, but what you're trusting is a federation of
Hmm.
unrelated parties, right? And so that's much safer than trusting one exchange to hold your
Hmm.
Bitcoin, but is still a lot less safe than holding Bitcoin itself. But it's a lot easier. It's a lot more efficient to use something like that, right? And so there will be some trade-offs like that, and I think ultimately Bitcoin will outcompete all of them in the end. But things like Fedimints, different forms of federations that allow spending of money that's either denominated or backed by Bitcoin, that distributes trust rather than forces us to trust a single party, especially the government,
Yeah.
would be a major improvement on our monetary system right now. And because of the fact that they are much more efficient than Bitcoin, will bring in some users, and probably will survive for some time until the same thing will eventually happen. Is you'll eventually end up in a fractional reserve, in a scenario where somebody is spending money that doesn't exist, and at
Yeah.
that point, that's where the angle opens up for competition from the main chain in Bitcoin that obviously cannot be created from nothing.
Yeah, exactly. How long do you predict that might take, just for fun? I know nobody can throw the dice
Oh
and
yeah.
predict that, but, like, how long do you what do you think?
Well, it's really hard to predict because there's so many moving pieces. I would say somewhere in the area of like that 10 to 15 year range. I think is probably where we're looking at for
Wow.
being in a world where our like the currencies of the world don't look anything like they do now. I
Yeah,
think we'll be in a world with like five or six currencies. Bitcoin will be one of them. Could be others backed by Bitcoin, um, and that transition will be a big messy process at the global forex scale. But at the end of the day, the end result is that all the people who maintain the current system and will be the ones making the decisions to back currencies by Bitcoin and other things like that. The end result is that all of those people, the political class, the moochers and the leechers, will be disintermediated and will only be useful and will only be continue to be able to make money off of the rest of the population if they provide a useful service to us,
yeah.
which they're obviously not doing right now.
They are not doing. I know, I can't wait to just see the carve out of the waste and all the bullshit and see what actually is left. I know, just seeing, again, I'm not either side political. I think they're all full of shit, but seeing the line items of the things where money is going here, then, like, it's like transgender mice, what? Uh, like, it's just ridiculous. Every little thing. It's like, why is the government spending a cent on any of this stuff? This makes zero sense. Like, let the free markets do what they want to go do. But um, I guess it's just, yeah, it's just, you think about, like, oh, look, we have a clubhouse, and this is my buddy Fred over here, and he's got this thing. Let's give him a few bucks so he can do his thing, and it just, like, gets out of control like a giant beast. So, um, all right. Any last thoughts? Like, you want to tell everybody what's going on? Let's talk about the rodeo, dude. Like,
Yeah,
what can people expect at the Bitcoin rodeo?
yeah, the rodeo is a really awesome conference we put on. We started it in 2018.
Cool.
Um, we put it on here in Calgary. It's very focused on how Bitcoin is useful to the real world. It's not a technical conference at all. We have a lot of panels, and we try to bring in a lot of the sort of freedom community.
Cool.
That's when we're talking about who do we talk to and who do we orange pill. That's the group, the people that have been awakened to this tyranny of the ever increasing scope of government, and I think COVID was the single best thing in terms of waking people up. And now we have this large group of people out there who essentially have realized that the government does not have their best interests in mind,
Yeah.
and they know that like this shit's just not right, but they don't necessarily see the solution yet. And we obviously think we do see the solution with Bitcoin. And so I think those are the people that are very ripe to be talking to. So we're going to be having a lot of discussions about, similar to what we're talking about, the nature of the state, the nature of government, and where does Bitcoin fit into the real world. And I think we're going to have some spicy stuff there. And then, yeah, we've always got a big focus on comedy. We did the roast of BTC sessions last year. That was a big hit.
Cool.
We do the bad Twitter takes. Nico and Ben do. They basically take all the worst ideas from Twitter from the last year and just talk shit about them. And yeah, you can see we'll have more speakers announced here fairly soon and more coming up. And yeah, if you want to come out, we'd love to have you. There's a couple things that would fit pretty well. So
Awesome. Maybe we'll do a women's brunch too, or something for the ladies in the town. Uh,
women do love brunch.
we do love our brunches. That's what we do. Um, yeah, it's fun. I love Natalie does her brunch. The last couple years at Miami Bitcoin, or Bitcoin conference, whatever, and I've been helping her with that. And it's a nice way, because I mean, what the ratio is of men to women in Bitcoin, and she always does it on the first day, so it's kind of like, okay, you're going into this 20,000 person crowd, and there's 200 of us. Awesome.
Yeah,
Uh, you can at least high five each other on the way to the bathroom, with no line for the ladies' bathroom and a big line for the men's bathroom, which never happens anywhere. So we always love to laugh about that. But yeah, it's fun, man. It takes all of us to get together to rock Bitcoin. I love it. But yeah, we'll talk offline about me getting over there and seeing what's up and what you guys are doing, how I can support you. But yeah, that'll be cool. So okay, so we've got everybody check out bullbitcoin.com, check out bitcoinrodeo.com. bitcoinwell.com. Dude, you got a lot going on. And you can follow Dave on X at Bitcoin Brains. Any final words for the people out there who might be on the fence about learning about Bitcoin and something that they could, feel a little bit more confident taking the first step?
Well, like I said earlier, the narrative has shifted from only put in money that you can afford to lose to only put in money that you can't afford to lose. And the
Yeah,
thing that I always say that sometimes takes people off guard when they're just on the outside kind of skeptical about Bitcoin is just that it's very risky not to own any Bitcoin. And when you
mm,
start to looking at it that way, the risk that the majority of people have taken by not owning Bitcoin over the last 10 years has been catastrophic for them financially.
totally. Or do you know any? I think Swan had something up there. They had a calculator of like, if you would have saved, $10 in Bitcoin a day or a week, you would have had this much, versus
Yeah,
saving $10 in fiat for, this much. So, do you know any other
yeah.
calculators people could check out for that?
Um, I can't think of this, but there was a website. I don't know. I'm assuming it's still out there, where you could actually like look up a product, and it'd be like, okay, well, if you bought a first generation iPod or
Yeah.
whatever, that'd be earlier. If you bought like, an iPhone in 2011
Uh,
instead of Bitcoin, what did that cost you?
yeah. Like it
And
cost
that
you
that
20 Bitcoin then. Now it costs you point 0.2 Bitcoin or this, so
well, or like your iPhone that you paid 20 Bitcoin for back then is now like, $2 million, right? So, um, those for Bitcoiners are painful to look at,
yeah.
but can be illuminating for people who have not thought about it that way.
I love that. I want to look that up. So it's just like a Bitcoin product compare price calculator or something.
Yeah,
It makes a difference because you're just like, oh, I should have bought some Bitcoin. Uh, right on. All right, Dave Bradley, thanks for taking all this time with you and having your cold experience out there smoking your cigar. The strongest and best looking Bitcoin entrepreneur in Canada just came on my show. I'm so grateful. I can't wait to see
thank you.
you up in Canada. Are you going to be in Vegas?
Probably. I think I may do what I did last year, which is go down. I went to Nashville and just didn't go to the conference.
Okay, cool.
I think the side events are the key with the big ones like that. Anyway, so
Yeah, there's going to be
very
some
very
fun ones.
likely.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a Toonster and Nosterd Boostergram Ball on Wednesday night there. Uh, Pubkey, Mike Germano are doing something there. I'm going to probably help them out at some point. But on Tuesday night, I'm probably DJing at Zook, which will be interesting. So that's like a whatever, some super club. I'm like, all right, stick me in there. Stick the geezer DJ in there. Let's go. Uh, yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm super excited. And well, cool. Well, hopefully I'll see you there, but I'll talk to you before then. And yeah, thanks everybody. And thank you all for tuning in. I hope you guys have the best day ever and happy, thankful Thursday. All right. Aloha.